Hi, guys. Okay, it's chapter 4, A Dog for Defense, January 6th, 1944. And I'm going to make sure the ringer's up on the phone. All right. June stepped up on the bench to check the mailbox next to the front door. A letter from Daddy. She tippity tapped in her red galoshes. Careful! Hobie grabbed her arm as she wouldn't fall. Even though the letter was addressed to both of them, June tore it open. Oh, it's in cursive. She jumped down, holding the letter out to Hobie. Please read it to me. Can we at least go inside where it's dry? Hobie opened the door, grabbing Duke with his favorite old tennis ball in his mouth before he could run out. Come on, boy. Hobie tugged at Duke's collar. We'll play later. Duke didn't care about the weather. In his doggy brain, rainy days were as good as sunny ones for a game of fetch. Mom was volunteering at the hospital, so Hobie had to make sure that June hung up her wet coat and put her galoshes in the closet. And he had to get her an after-school snack. Read the letter, she repeated. Want some Ovaltine with it? He asked. He was as eager as his sister to hear what Dad had to say, but sometimes things were better when you waited for them. Are there cookies? June asked, clinking a saucepan out of the cupboard. Hobie checked the big cookie jar. Empty. Graham crackers, he suggested. June sighed. Oh, all right. Hobie heated the milk and stirred in the Ovaltine powder. He ladled the warm drink into mugs and set out a plate of graham crackers. Ready? He asked, picking up the letter. Wait, June jumped up. Kitty wants to hear too. She grabbed the doll from her bedroom and propped it up on the table. Okay, we're ready. Hobie unfolded the V-mail letter carefully so it wouldn't tear. Dear Hobie and Junebug, I was so proud to hear about those good report cards. My buttons nearly popped right off my uniform. Keep up the good work. But don't get too much smarter than your old dad, please. Speaking of good work, I know you're both being troopers, pitching in at home and all. I'm going to have to ask you to be good soldiers a while longer. Our favorite uncle has added a few more dances to my dance card. Don't you worry. The Lily Bess, too, is one tough bird. It can be 30 or 130. She'll do the job. Someday, when you're older, I'd like to bring you here. They drink hot tea and eat cold toast. But they're good folks. They don't rattle easy, and that's something I admire. This one's a groaner, but it's the best I've got for this time. What do you do when your dog gets lost in the woods? Put your ear to the tree and listen for the bark. Aim, fly, fight. Love, Dad. What did Daddy mean? June asked, nibbling the edge of the cracker. About dancing. Hobie shoved his Ovaltine aside. It means more missions. He wanted to crumble up the letter and throw it in the garbage. Dad was supposed to fly 25 missions. 25, and then he could come home. It wasn't fair. June fussed with Kitty's hair. How many more? She asked. Who knows? Hobie took another look at the letter. Somewhere between 30 and 130. He couldn't breathe. He had to get out of there. He shoved his chair back. Come on, Duke. A volcano of mad erupted inside of him, and the driving rain did nothing to cool it off. Hobie threw the ball over and over and over again as hard as he could. Hump! He hated it. He hated this. Hump! He hated it. This darn war was all their fault. Hump! He even hated the army for making Dad fly more missions. Duke dropped the ball at Hobie's feet. Water ran off of his head as he bent over to pick it up. He hurled it again. Hump! He hated himself for not doing everything that he could. That was the strongest hate of all. Mom pulled up to the curb and slid out of the car. Hobie, you're soaked. She hustled him inside. What were you thinking? This coat will never dry out in time for school tomorrow. She wrung it out over the sink and then hung it by the oil heater in the kitchen. Kitty's sad, June announced. About what? Mom hung up her own coat and unpinned her hat. Daddy's letter. Mom pivoted on her brown high heels. You heard from Dad today? Hobie got the letter and handed it to Mom. She read it quickly, chewing all the lipstick off of her lower lip. Well, she said, folding it back up, we certainly need to send Dad a joke book. That was one of his worst. She put the letter in the basket with all the others. Then she tied on an apron and bustled around the kitchen, opening cupboards and banging pots and pans. Where are those green beans? She asked, holding the can in her hand. Hobie pointed that out to her. Mom pressed the can to her chest, like she was praying. June curled up on the sofa, and Kitty shielded it with Kitty shielding her face, so no one would see that her thumb was in her mouth. She had sucked it since Dad first went off to the war. Seeing that was like getting jabbed with a fishhook right in the heart. Even Duke could tell how sad June was. He curled up next to her for the rest of the afternoon. Hobie tried to eat the dinner Mom fixed, but mostly he just moved the mashed potatoes around on the plate. June jabbed green beans one after another into a mound of potatoes. I made a porcupine, she said, with green quills. Instead of giving June a lecture about starving children in China and about not playing with her food, Mom just poured herself another cup of coffee. Her plate went untouched. Why can't this war be over? June burst out, smashing the porcupine with her fork. Fat tears rolled down to her cheeks. Come here, sweetie. Mom scooted her chair back from the table. June crawled up on Mom's lap, darkening the front of her blouse with tears. Hobie cleared the table and fed Duke some of the scraps. He pretended to read his Hardy Boys book until it was time to take Duke out for bed. When they came back in, he could hear Mom and June in June's room. Sleep with me, Mommy, June asked. The mattress springs creaked a little when Mom was humming a lullaby. Hobie flopped across his own bed, his heart as heavy as an anchor. On his dresser was a photo of Dad, Uncle Trig, and Grandfather Henson. It was taken before Uncle Trig got his arm caught in the winch that one fishing season. The three of them were shaking hands with members of another crew, men they'd risk their own lives to rescue in a stormy sea. Dad had a saying that courage doesn't always roar, but with the Henson men it seemed to roar. Hensons did what they needed, no matter how hard it was. Hobie tossed and turned all that night, thinking and thinking. When he finally fell asleep, it seemed only 5 minutes had passed before he heard Mom making her breakfast coffee. Hobie rolled over on his side, his arm dangling off the mattress edge, his fingers ruffling Duke's fur. Then he patted the bed. Up, Duke stood and stretched, eventually obeying. Hobie curled up next to his best friend and tried to think about what he was going to say to Mom and June. When he told them of his decision over their breakfast of oatmeal, June burst into tears. No, no, not Duke. Then she ran to her room and slammed the door. It took Mom 20 minutes of talking to her to get her to come out and get ready for school. There wasn't much time for Mom to say anything to Hobie. As he headed out the door, she grabbed him in a hug. It's like I said, she told him. You and your father, peas in a pod. Hobie didn't feel anything like Dad as he went through the motions of the school day. He jumped in his seat when Max tapped on his arm. We're supposed to exchange spelling tests, he said. Hobie blinked. It was as if Max was speaking German. What? Max held up a piece of paper. You're supposed to correct my test and I'm supposed to do yours? Hobie looked down. His test paper was completely blank. He handed it over anyway. Max's forehead wrinkled. Are you okay? He asked. Maybe you need to go to the nurse. I'm fine, Hobie lied. Taking Max's test, Scooter would have made some sort of joke to cheer Hobie up, not asked if he wanted him to go to the nurse. He might have even done his Mortimer Snerd imitation. That was one of Scooter's best. When Hobie got his test back, he saw that Max had written the score at the top, but it was so small you need a magnifying glass to see the zero. He didn't feel so bad as he passed his paper forward when Mrs. Thornton called for them. Maybe there was more than one way to cheer a guy up. As she had on the way to school, June refused to speak to Hobie on the way home. She shut herself in her bedroom while Mom stood by as he dialed Mr. Rasmussen's phone number. On Saturday, Hobie's stomach felt like it had the first time he went out to the Lily Bess. All he could do was hang over the side, as limp as seaweed. Every time he heard a car on the street, he jumped up and he ran to the window. Duke began to whimper and pace. What time is it now? Hobie rubbed Duke's belly. 10 minutes later than it was last time you asked. Mom took another stitch in the sock that she was darning for June. Why don't you go and play fetch? She said. It'd be good for the both of you. When Duke saw the ball in Hobie's hand, he jumped straight up and flipped around. Hobie threw Duke fetched. He snagged the ball before it hit the ground every single time. Being fast would help keep him safe. It started to drizzle as a Buick sedan idled to the curb. The quiet after the engine shut off tied another knot in Hobie's stomach. Mr. Rasmussen slid out from behind the steering wheel. There is our new recruit. Duke ran to greet him. Off, Hobie warned. Sometimes with men, Duke would jump up. Duke obeyed, but wiggled close for a head pat. Mr. Rasmussen obliged. Hey there, buddy, he said. Good dog. He pulled a dog biscuit from his pocket. May I give him this? Hobie nodded. Duke happily crunched the treat, while Mr. Rasmussen reached for a briefcase on the front seat. Hobie patted his leg, and Duke trotted over. They all went inside. Mr. Rasmussen settled on the sofa in the front room. Hobie sat on the footstool next to Mom's chair, his arms around Duke's neck. He felt like he was waiting his turn for a shot at the doctor's office. June and Kitty sat far across the room from Mr. Rasmussen as they could. Hobie could see June's thumb sneaking in and out of her mouth. The first 3 times Mom offered, Mr. Rasmussen turned down coffee, but finally he said, well, if it's not too much of a trouble, I would enjoy a cup. Mom carried in a tray with 2 cups and a plate of cookies. Hobie just wrapped his arms tighter around Duke's neck when Mom offered him one. June didn't take a cookie either. Mr. Rasmussen praised the cookies and the coffee. Then he picked up his briefcase. Shall we take care of the paperwork? He unlocked the latches, reaching inside for a form that he held out to Hobie. Hobie kept his arm around Duke's neck. Mr. Rasmussen pulled a pen from his pocket. You haven't changed your mind, have you? Yes, Hobie wanted to say. He had changed his mind a million times since they'd talked on the phone. A thought occurred to Hobie. What if the army changes its mind? He asked. What if they don't want Duke? Well, some dogs are rejected because of bad health, but Duke looks to be a perfect specimen. Mr. Rasmussen pursed his lips, thinking, and of course some dogs aren't trainable or have bad habits that can't be broken. He patted Hobie's arm. Don't worry. Those instances are very rare. Hobie hadn't been worried. He'd been hopeful. He sighed and took Mr. Rasmussen's pen. Using his best Palmer method penmanship, Hobie filled out each line. Breed, German Shepherd. Age, 3. Is the dog afraid of noise? Storm shy, gun shy? Hobie stopped. Pointed to the last question. Why do you ask this? Duke's going to be a guard dog here, right? Mr. Rasmussen straightened his tie. That's up to the army. Not dogs for defense, but most dogs will stay in the States. Hobie held the pen over the paper. He was tempted to answer that gun shy question with yes. Then Duke might be disqualified, but that would be dishonest. He wrote a shaky no. The very last section asked, where should your dog be returned after the war? Hobie looked up at Mr. Rasmussen. Doesn't everyone want their dog back? He asked. Mr. Rasmussen brushed the cookie crumbs from his suit jacket. Some people worry that the dogs won't know them anymore, or that it'd be too hard to undo the military training, so they let the handlers keep them. Hobie sat back. Who would ever write down on that form that they didn't want their dog back? Well, Duke is coming home to me. Mr. Rasmussen placed his hands on his thighs and leaned forward. Son, I'm not going to make a promise I can't keep. He looked straight at Hobie. The army will do all that it can to make sure that Duke comes back to you. Absolutely all. Hobie felt like he'd walked to the edge of a gangplank. What was Mr. Rasmussen saying? That Duke might not come back? That he might not make it? His stomach felt seasick again. Do some of the dogs get hurt? Hobie asked. It has happened before. Mr. Rasmussen kept Hobie's gaze. It might help you to know that since we've been using dogs, more and more soldiers are making it home to their families, safe and sound. That was good, of course, but it had never occurred to Hobie that Duke might be in danger. Was it too late to change his mind? Hobie looked at June and then Mom and then over at the photo of Dad on the mantel. He was smartly dressed in his uniform, olive drab shirt and tie, with his hat tilted at a slight angle on his head. He looked all business, except for the familiar upward curve at each corner of his mouth. His eyes seemed to be looking directly at Hobie. Hobie rolled the pen between his forefinger and his thumb. More soldiers making it home safe and sound. That's what Mr. Rasmussen said. Soldiers and pilots, safe and sound. Hobie finished filling out the form and handed it back. Mr. Rasmussen shook his head. I'll personally take Duke to the station, he smiled sadly. He and Ludwig will ship out together on a troop train. That'll be nice. They'll have some company. The army will take good care of Duke, don't you worry. He said goodbye to Mom and June and then turned back to Hobie. Are you ready? No, he wasn't ready. How could he be? But Hobie whistled and Duke followed him outside to Mr. Rasmussen's car. Wait, June called. Kitty wants to say goodbye. She threw herself at Duke, her face buried in his ruff. Her shoulders bobbed up and down with silent sobbing. Okay, honey. Mom gently pulled her away. Mr. Rasmussen needs to get going. In, boy, Hobie pointed to the back seat. Duke leapt right in. A car ride with a treat. He shifted from side to side, his nose making wet prints on the windows. Mr. Rasmussen would have to wash them later. Thank you for the coffee and the cookies. Mr. Rasmussen slid into the front seat and closed the door. Duke put a paw up on the window. It looked like he was saying, Hey, aren't you coming? Hobie lifted his hand, palm facing Duke. Command to sit. Duke sat. His brown eyes bored into Hobie's. Hobie's stomach churned. What was he doing? Sending this dog away? He looked over at Mom. She put her arm around his shoulder. It's for a good cause, right? For Dad. You'll be okay, boy, Hobie called out in a rusty voice. Duke would be okay. Would be safe. That's what Hobie told himself as he stood on the sidewalk and watched Mr. Rasmussen drive away with his dog. All right, that was chapter 4. Thanks, you guys.